We are live.
All right, I'm gonna call this meeting of the IGR committee to order. Yeah, governmental relations to order. We have an agenda to review and minutes approval from November 6th. Any additions, corrections to the minutes, or any additions to the agenda, or any amendments to the agenda? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve the agenda and the minutes from November 6th.
So moved.
Okay.
Second, sorry.
Sir? Okay, so we got a motion, a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
All right, that motion passes. So now we're on to item 3, review of the 2025 priorities draft. And this is an action item. So let's go ahead, Ethan. Why don't you just lead us off on this one?
Thank you, Councilor. As you all have, as we've been discussing these past few months, and you've been reviewing the various iterations of the state priorities, this item in front of you for the December 4th memo, that is the draft 2025 Eugene State Legislative Priorities document, has been condensed down to 1 page, and it has 6 items on it. There are 2 items that the full city council will be taking up later in January that could potentially, should there be direction, be added to this list. But for right now, this is the list that are items that have got clear council guidance and support for these positions. There should be no surprises here, and so I'm just going to walk through these really quickly. If you have any questions, please just let me know. Number 1, seek long-term funding for unhoused shelter with the ability for state funding to pass through directly to cities. So I've revised this one to be more in line with where the work group recommendations are, that the sustainable shelter work group that Mayor Venus has been a part of. And so this is really support the expansion of allowable program funding for alternative programs beyond the emergency shelter definition to include safe vehicle parking spots and alternative shelters, and then partner with Lane County to request funding from the legislature and OHCS to provide full funding to Eugene-based shelters for the 25-27 biennium. This is in alignment with the work group's recommendations, the shelter work group's recommendations, and also the language that was provided to the housing or the homeless and poverty board I think earlier in this, at last month, with the last HPB meeting. And so Councilor Groves, this should align with the language that was put in front of that group from Lane County.
HSC, right?
HSC, okay, thank you. And so then the second is we'll seek funding for Clear Lake Road infrastructure. So this the figure has been revised from 8.5 to 10.5 million, and that's based upon City of Eugene, our engineering office division, revising the estimates based upon current infrastructure costs. And so we are updating the request for that. We will submit it to the capital construction request process. Number 3, this is also in alignment with what was presented to the HSC. And so the support increased state investment in behavioral health systems, and that is going to be focused in on supporting Lane County's request for state funding for the Lane Stabilization Center. So that should be similar language to then what was adopted at the HSC or presented and ideally adopted. Number 4, support increased protections related to threats to public officials. And so we've discussed this one before. It's utilizing Senate Bill 92 2013, and it's the basis for LC 1701, legislative concept 1701. We have a draft of that. We are in the process of revising the definition of public official to be a bit more expansive, to include not only elected officials, but appointed officials, volunteers, and potentially city staff and or municipal staff, public staff. And that has actually brought in more partners, potential partners, and support for advocacy, including represent the AFSCME representation and Oregon Parks and Recreation Association. They're have sought a similar bill for protections for their employees and threats. And so we're working to navigate a kind of a larger public official, public employee a bill. And that has been League of Oregon Cities. We're working with the league to move that forward. And my focus next week while in Salem will be to seek co-sponsors and supporters for the bill once we get a bill number and it's put forth on Senate Judiciary is what we're focusing on.
Question, Ethan.
Yep.
Is AFSCME and AFL-CIO, all the unions aligned on this with this particular proposal for?
We know that
Coalition.
AFSCME has, Councilor Evans, we know that AFSCME has reached on out. They have interest from not so much City of Eugene AFSCME representation, but AFSCME representation statewide for some of their represented employees that are doing things like meter reading and running into threats or threatening experiences. And so we're trying to navigate that to make it inclusive, but also recognize that when you expand it, there's other issues that come to bear. So we're working on that. We haven't spent time with any of the other labor unions, but they asked me, came forward and said, hey, we're interested.
Gotcha.
And that was with LOC, so in that conversation. We're also working with Metro, and I'll be getting more information on that one, but it's secure. This is number 5, secure authority for local governments to prohibit firearms in public buildings. And then the 6 is improvements to the ground emergency medical transportation system. As I'd shared previously, that there's these improvements, kind of a broad set of improvements to the into an EMS 2.0 omnibus bill that Representative Grayberg is pulling forward. And so this would be incorporated into that. And our Deputy Chief Heppel has been heavily engaged in this and with the Oregon Fire Chiefs Association. So we'll continue to support that and support the Deputy Chief in his efforts. So those are our top 6 priority items that we have very clearly right now. There will be other items that will come up in the legislative session that will be priority 1 bills that we will be either supportive of or in opposition to. And so once the session starts and we've got a bill list, we will have our priority list, and then as well the priority 1 bills that we'll be also lobbying. And so this won't be the end of content that we take on, but this is what we're going to be heavily focused in on trying to accomplish during the session.
Mayor, go ahead.
So, thank you. So you mentioned 2 of these would be coming back to council in January.
Thank you, Mayor. Clarification. Not
Not
these.
these, on the
There's
other.
2 other items that council will be discussing. One is on ORS 195-530. Came out of H Bill 3115, which is the codification of the Boise v. Martin. So Catherine Brotherton was here with
Right.
you all, and you gave direction to have that conversation of should the city take a position on repeal of that. And so that's getting geared on up for January 29th work session. Additionally, the item related to, second item is related to a statewide ban on a potential bill that would put a ban on statewide on rental application
That's
screening.
right.
fields.
That's right. Okay.
So
Thank you.
IGR gave direction to
Right.
add that to the work session, and so those are the two policy items we'll have a conversation with council right now, currently scheduled for the January 29th. Once we get clarification on those, we'll take action. It could be putting them into our priorities list. It could be something that we then put into the policies document, which we'll speak of at the next agenda item today. So
Okay, got it. Thank you.
you're welcome.
You ready to go on to item 4?
Well, I'd like to
Keep going.
well, this is in front of IGR for action today, approval,
That's right.
seeking, and my recommendation is for, to approve currently as provided to you, and then this would become the basis for our legislative priorities for the 2025 session. And we'll bring that to when we have the work session with the full city council on IGR priorities and policies, which is scheduled for the 15th of January currently, but because of budget discussions, that might get moved to a later date to ensure that council is working through the budget issues that are in front of it. So that's our tentative calendaring right now.
So are we ready to take action on this? We just need a motion, so moved, or however you want to do it, counselors.
Yeah, so I move that we approve the 2025 Eugene State Legislative Priorities.
Well
Second.
done. Second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Motion passes.
Great.
Now we're on to item 4.
Excellent. Thank you, counselors and Counselor Evans. So item 4, as you all know, we've got 2 documents that we work off of. One is what we're after, what we're gonna pursue proactively. That's the priorities document, which you just approved. The second is a general game plan framework for when bills come on up during the session. We review existing ordinances, existing city policy, and this document helps to articulate and pull out some of the more often initiated topics at the state level to have that clarity. And so this is an updated version. There's no additions to this from the 2023 or excuse me, the 2024 version. The only thing that I have edited is removed some things that seem to be no longer germane to the current legislative issues. And so, for instance, on page 4, and you'll see that there's a double strikeout on these. On page 4 at the bottom, Eugene supports efforts to reform ballot measure 110. Well,
That's dead.
that was taken care of in the last legislative session, so I'm recommending to remove that one. Additionally, then over on page 5 of 6, on page 5, under climate recovery number 6, Eugene supports legislation that improves energy efficiency in the Oregon Building Code in alignment with Executive Order 1720. Much of that work was addressed in 2023 under the climate bill that Mayor Venus had been part of, the work group and lead up to that. And so now when I'm saying, okay, we can remove this because it's no longer accurate or germane. On 6, on page 6, number 9, top of the page, Eugene supports local government's ability to adopt the Oregon State Reach Code as the base energy efficiency code for local construction. Again, that one was pre the 2023 session when the work group that came back deprioritized this and moved the conversation into a different realm. And having this on is no longer pertinent to the city, to statewide discussions. The Reach Code has not been something that is being discussed statewide. And then just in clarity on the equity and inclusion, number 2, removing the IE, the example piece of discrimination against Asian and Asian Americans in connection to the origins of COVID-19. Again, this was put together during, I think, 2021, 2022, when we put these forward. And we wanted to clarify on this in regards to timely condemnation of actions against certain groups in relation to specific events. And so we've progressed forward. My recommendation is just to leave the language as is, but remove the example. And so those are the recommendations that I'm making and putting forward to clean this document up. And as I said, there's no additions at this time. So I'll turn it back over to you.
So one question is the equity and inclusion piece. So we are a sanctuary city, sanctuary state, and all of that. So, I mean, we're probably going to have to address this at some point in our federal conversations with the new administration. Any clues as to, you know, what may or may not come out of the new administration, or are we just going to wait and see what happens after everybody gets appointed or confirmed or rejected or whatever the case may be?
Thank you for that question, Counselor Evans. The
Right
state,
now, we don't know what, I mean, we have a policy in place. We just don't know what's going to come up to, you know, preclude that policy.
exactly. So I do not know the ordinance number, but the city council passed an ordinance that was that affirmed that law enforcement would not be acting on migration status only law enforcement issues.
We wouldn't be cooperating with ICE, for example.
Unless there is a felony or misdemeanor or some charge that is not associated with immigration status. And so there has to be some criminality other than
That would be
citizenship status.
criminality that is committed here in the United States or not going back to past criminal records going, you know, back to Guatemala or wherever somebody comes from, or Norway.
That's my understanding.
It's local, state, federal laws in the United States.
And that is a statute that was passed at the state level. City of Eugene aligned with that. City council passed an ordinance as well. That's, you know, and basically that is what constitutes quote unquote a sanctuary city is that if someone is living in the community that does not have legal immigration status, that local law enforcement will not be enforcing that set of federal laws unless there is another piece. And so then that triggers the engagement with the federal law enforcement. So that's kind of where we are right now. I believe that the state will address this in the governor's budget, which in the items for committee members, I'd like to talk a little bit about the governor's recommended budget. And there's a whole suite of proposals that she has in there that overlap with that. Councilor Groves.
Yeah, Randy?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to drill in a little bit on our status as a sanctuary city. I understand that we passed motions that preclude the police from just routinely cooperating with ICE. But I've also heard both ways, that we are a sanctuary city, and I've heard that we are not. And my understanding, and I may have this wrong, that there are other additional things that would need to be done to be considered quote unquote a sanctuary city. Is that correct?
Councilor Groves, my understanding is that there's no clear definition of what sanctuary city is. And when we speak about the position of the city of Eugene, we don't use that terminology.
Okay.
We're very clear to say that how we approach some of those issues is related to the ordinance that the city council passed, related to sometimes the political language around this concept of sanctuary city. We've sidestepped that in the past and said, you know, it is a term that is sometimes ill-defined, and you are correct that sometimes because of the ordinance that has been passed, Eugene is identified by external sources as a sanctuary city. And then at other times, because we don't have all of the other potential policy elements that other cities may take, that we are not identified by external sources there. Internally and officially, we don't utilize those terms. We just kind of point to the ordinance that was passed. And I apologize, I don't have that ordinance number in front of me, but it's.
Well, I mean, that helps clarify it quite a bit for me. And the reason I'm asking, I can't say I frequently get asked, but periodically I do get asked if we're a sanctuary city, or I'm told we are a sanctuary city, and then I'm told we're not. And I've just never, that's the clearest explanation I've been given. And I'm not trying to get into the pro or con. I'm just trying to figure out what are we, so I can answer accurately when I am asked that question.
Go ahead, Mayor.
The other thing I would say, Randy, is that we are aligning with the 10th Amendment and states' rights, right?
Okay.
That is actually what we have done.
Got it. Well, thank you. I will try to give a better explanation next time.
And Councilor Groves, what I can do is I'll find it is on where I found it was it's on our city website.
It is. And
Oh,
Karin and I
okay.
issued a statement about it. I
Yeah.
can't remember the number either,
Okay.
but we referenced the ordinance number in that statement also.
Yeah, and so I'll follow up to this group with the link from
Well,
our
and
website.
I appreciate that, and I appreciate what you said, Mayor. And I did read what you and Karin put out in a joint statement, but then I remember saying, you know, I need to find out if we are or aren't. So because I do occasionally get asked that question, and I'm guessing other counselors do as well.
And clearly the term hasn't really been defined
I understand.
on the federal level anyway. So, you know, whoever's talking about it, you know, doesn't have clarity on what is a sanctuary city, what is a sanctuary state, what isn't, and what is the bar that defines that?
Right. We received an email today to the mayor, council, and city manager that told us we are a sanctuary state and a sanctuary city. That's the latest time I've heard it. But like I said, I've had, and these aren't people generally trying to pick bones about it. They just genuinely want to know what we are.
Well, we're gonna have to face that one way or another coming up. So do we have any more on item 4? We ready to move on to item 5?
Item 4, I'm seeking
We need
approval
approval.
for
Okay.
this one as well. So
Do we have a motion on item number 4?
It's Randy's turn.
Well, I just thinking you did such a fine job, Counselor Ye. I'm trying, I don't have the notes in front of me. So
Yeah,
moved.
Second.
well, and for clarity and for the record, I would say so moved is meant and understood to mean that the proposed 2025 state and federal legislative policy draft version on December 4th is with the proposed revisions is approved.
I apologize. I normally have this pulled up in front of me and I couldn't find it today when I was signing in.
Sorry, Rand. Sorry about that.
All right, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Now we're on item.
So I have a couple items I just want to share with you. The governor's recommended budget came out on Monday. And so I want to just walk through a couple things or walk through the top line items for your reference and also then link them to the priorities and policy documents that you just approved. And so the governor's top three items that she is focusing in on are homelessness and housing, behavioral health, and education. And so that's great because those first two really align with where the city of Eugene as an organization's priorities are and IGR's direction and ideally city council's direction. And additionally, where our community is with the addition of the educational focus that we know that our partners in the school districts are also supportive of the governor's requests. And so under homelessness, so OHCS, Oregon Housing Community Services, proposed roughly 218 million. The governor took that proposal and then put it on into her recommended budget for Oregon statewide system of shelters. And we more than likely will be seeking additional dollars in increase from the legislature more than this 218 million. And the reason being is because as part of the sustainable shelter work group, we are recommending the addition of a third category of eligible types of shelter, which would include Eugene's safe camping spots, the safe rest, and the vehicle camping. And so with this addition of a new category, the pie should be increased. And when I say the pie, the allocation of funds should be increased so that there's funds that are going to keep open existing shelters that the state has funded in the past and existing shelters that are important to addressing homeless emergency, but that the state has not provided funding for in the past. And so the 218 million is what is being proposed for the biennium. We think that that's kind of the floor, and we would more than likely ask for more because there's the recognition that the eligibility is expanding to cover more territory. She's also recommending 188 million to maintain current efforts to transition Oregonians out of homelessness and into housing. There's another 173 million to maintain services to prevent Oregonians from becoming homelessness in the first place. Another 105 million to maintain long-term rental assistance. And so all of those large amounts overlap between what Lane County and the city of Eugene have been doing related to rent assistance, outreach, and additional services to keep people housed and to move people out of unhoused situations into PSH and actually PSH permanent supportive housing, and additionally take on more shelter options or support a wider look at shelter. There's also funding for 3.5 million to expand initiative to target housing supports to people with behavioral health needs. As you all know, that there's a linkage between behavioral health, housing, homelessness, and then additionally our legal system, our court system. Related to housing supply, building the Oregon that's possible. So there's the governor is recommending 880 million in new bonding authority to build more affordable housing and home ownership pathways. And really supportive of there's 100 million proposal to establish a new housing infrastructure program. And that housing infrastructure program got kickstarted during the last legislative session under Senate Bill 1537 and its corresponding item, House Bill 1530. 1530 allocated money to jurisdictions. City of Eugene received $6 million for the build out of Crow Road infrastructure to serve housing. And so we're in the process of doing that. 1537, Senate Bill 1537, it had a section 16, which directed DLCD to recommend to the legislature a program for local, as they say it, evaluation considerations and metrics for local infrastructure projects to support housing. The LCD has a draft out of that. City of Eugene, League of Oregon Cities, City of Portland, we've reviewed and we've been making comments back to the LCD on the viability and the appropriateness of some of the proposed evaluation metrics. So we're pretty heavily engaged in this discussion on how the state would set up a new infrastructure program. And then the governor's, and we're very supportive and thankful that the governor is proposing 100 million in this biennium to fund that, because it would ultimately go to additional infrastructure projects that would range from site specific. So maybe an affordable housing project here on the riverfront potentially, to a planned area growth, so potentially a subdivision, to then also system-wide infrastructure projects like our Crow Road project. And so we're very supportive of that, and that would align. We have in our policies document supports for that, and so I have got clear direction from existing direction from City Council to go and advocate for that in a strong way. She's also included 57 million to continue efforts for supporting first-time home buyers and Oregonians looking to buy an affordable home, which I know has been an item that city councilors have talked over many years in regards to home ownership and the benefits of that, especially in our community with such a high number of renters, being able to transition more people into home ownership. Interestingly, there's 3.5 million to continue implementation of the Housing Accountability and Production Office. And so cities are monitoring how that the HAPO, as it's called, office is going to get set up and what the impact it will have towards cities. We're hopefully it'll be beneficial and focus more on technical assistance and less on regulatory enforcement. So moving on to behavioral health. She's recommending 90 million reinvested from ARPA funds to the general fund for capacity building, and what that would be focused in towards is an additional 336 beds on top of the governor's current goal of additional 465 beds by the end of 2026. And so if you remember during the first behavioral health work session, where Christy and I presented, one of the items that we talked about was facilities capacity and new beds needed across the state. And so this $90 million is moving towards that. We saw that, and I believe that the legislature may increase that, because there was, I think it was roughly 800 million over a 5-year period that was needed. And so that came down to, over 150 million per year that would need to be invested. And so this 90 million is moving towards that, but we'll see where that comes, if it increases. She's also proposing 50 million to be reinvested from ARPA funds, which is the American Recovery. That's it.
American Recovery Protect. American Rescue. Why am we? American Rescue Plan Act? Yeah.
Yes. Oh my God.
Recovery Plan Act.
It was the
Funny.
response to
Right.
the COVID response.
Right.
Apologies. And so there's 50 million from the existing ARPA funds over to the general fund to strengthen workforce investments. And so again, that was one of the items that came up in the council work session on behavioral health. And so what they're proposing is investing 25.7 million in behavioral health education and training programs, wraparound supports for students, tuition assistance and scholarships, and 24.3 million invested towards graduate stipends, loan repayment, and peer and manager support for community mental health workforce. And so a lot of that is then being able to incentivize people to come on into the workforce and stay within, when they say community mental health, it's really those entities that are serving either as a nonprofit or in the public sector sphere.
Go ahead, Mayor.
I have a thought about this, and I imagine that Jennifer in her other working role has a thought. I remember several years ago having this conversation with then ILCC President Marge, what was her last name anyway?
Hamilton.
Hamilton, thank you. And looking at workforce development, and what Marge had said is, she said, if we can set up a program, we can train, we can educate, but she said, I can't in good conscience do that if those people are going to graduate and then get paid minimum wage. And so Jennifer may have a thought about that too. I just think, this is a broader conversation and not an IGR necessarily, but just a sort of an insight as that moves forward, that's part of the puzzle. But the other part of the puzzle is supporting those nonprofit organizations that can't afford to pay really living wages to a lot of their staff. And that's the burnout problem, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously, I think all of us have heard it from different organizations, how they struggle to pay folks an amount that keeps them around, right? I mean, it's one thing if you start at a basic level. A lot of us have done that in our careers, but we knew that as time went on, our pay would increase. But if there aren't those opportunities, or your career path doesn't have those levels that some nonprofits don't have, it's a huge, complicated web of issues. That's not easily solved by a workforce development program. That's just one tiny step. Yeah, and I do worry that the program would start out strong and then just people would realize it wasn't worth their time and stop doing it. So that's not helping anyone. People just, now they have a certificate that they feel like is useless and they feel like they've been let down. So I don't know.
Yeah, we had that problem for years with the culinary program. Is you train people to go into the workforce and then they go work for some of these hotels or restaurants and they're getting paid minimum wage or barely getting paid anything. And it's like, so I invested 2 years and rang up this debt, and I can't afford the debt and I can't afford my rent. So, well, which one do I pay? That's the CTE conundrum.
And I will say, in regards to that, one of the things that the governor's added to the budget is over 130 million for maintaining and expanding provider rate increases. And so that's to retain state's Medicaid program workforce and increase inpatient psychiatric rates. So I think that they do recognize, and Counselor Leach spoke about this, I think briefly at one of the behavioral health work sessions on reimbursement rates. And we know that that is an issue not only for private pay and for public community mental health, but also it's an issue, the reimbursement rate that ESF gets for transport. We're constantly working on that. So it is part of the puzzle that is discussed within the behavioral health committees on the Senate and the House side. And so I think that we're seeing that those different levers are recognized and trying to be adjusted.
Super, great.
Continuing on within behavioral health. So this one is, as we've spoke about previously, deflection. So there's 40 million. She's proposing 40 million to continue deflection services through the Criminal Justice Commission, the CJC. There's 16 million to continue investments in community mental health programs for deflection and diversion. And there's 14 million in new investment for certified community behavioral health centers, and 31 million for new investment in total funds for harm reduction. So there's still continued, again, these different levers that we're seeing investments needing to be made and continuing to be made. Moving on and this is just into education, and I won't go into the full thing, but what she's proposing is 25 million for new youth behavioral health investments packages. And so 17 million invested in targeted residential and community-based behavioral health and substance use disorder capacity, 6 million in funding for school-based health centers to allow for expansion of mental health services, substance use disorder screenings and prevention services, and also 1 million to expand culturally responsive youth suicide prevention work. And so council had heard about this with Josh's presentation, or Josh Bates's presentation on state of youth. And so those are other present people or proposals that would impact our community. Regarding the item that Councilor Evans, you brought on up previously, in terms of the federal administration, the governor and the legislature has made a point of saying, how do we protect, in the way that they're discussing it, is protecting Oregon values. And so they've identified funds that she's presenting that would allow for support of existing Oregon values, broadly defined. So 2 million in added attorney resources to the Attorney General's office and that's likely for having litigation costs. 2 million in added resources towards the bias response hotline. 2.5 million in new investment support grants to expand reproductive health equity. 2.5 million new investment that will be held in reserve to protect Oregon from an immediate disruption in care. And so if there's any federal reproductive health program funding decline, $7 million in continued support for universal navigation and representation for immigration matters. And then also 25 million in the Oregon Department of Energy's Community Renewable Energy Program, CREP. The city of Eugene and Eugene broadly, we received, I think in the last round of the CREP dollars from Odo, Eugene projects received funding. So there's one out at the airport, and there's a couple others that I think that city of Eugene was recipients of, and also community groups were recipients of. So those are funds that are making their way here. And I think those were just, there's also 7 million in continuing funds to support coordinated statewide response to emergencies, which benefits when there's large scale emergencies and that there's a state system to stand on up. And I think that's about, there is, and the last one that I would say is that's highlighted is 9.1 million to maintain DPSSTs. So it's the Department of Public Standards and Training level. So DPSST's training levels to prevent a law enforcement backlog. And so a lot of our law enforcement will go to DPSST to get their state training. And so if there's a backlog there, then we can hire new police recruits, but then we can't get them trained by the state. And so that just, so Chief Skinner over the course of years has said, yeah, just getting the backlog at DPSST cleaned up would be a huge help to EPD's recruitment, retention, and training efforts. And then that impacts the quality of officers that are on the street because of the level of training that they can receive in an efficient manner. So that's also being put forward. What's that?
Anybody else have anything for the good of the order?
Oh, I've got one more thing.
Go for it.
We received our the congressionally directed spending earmarks proposals, and so there was 2 out of EPD, 1 out of the airport, and 1 out of Parks and Open Space. We're reviewing those, and we're coming up with a revised package that we would put forward. We're going to put those to execs by the end of this month, and then once we get support and approval for that package, we'll come back and share that with IGR on the January 8th meeting, which will be the first meeting. We won't be meeting on January 1st, which is the first Wednesday.
No, I think we all will be watching other things than IGR. So
We got Randy
first,
Randy's got his hand up.
Randy, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to clarify on DPSST, it's Department of Public Safety Standards and Training, and it includes police or law enforcement, corrections, and fire, but it's mostly for police.
Counselor. And then the last thing that I would say is I just want to recognize that this is Mayor Menace's last IGR meeting, and publicly just to say it's been a pleasure to serve you for 8 years. And we have all grown and appreciated your wisdom and kindness and insight. Thank you for your service.
Thank you. It has been really my pleasure to serve and my pleasure to work with all of you. And Ethan and I have put on a lot of miles in airplanes and in various cities, getting to and from, and very memorable miles doing IGR work. So yeah, thank you all. It's been great working with you. This is a great team, this committee. So thank you. Thank you for the good intention and the and the collegiality of the work you do.
Planes, trains, and automobiles.
Right, we put in a lot of miles. So.
Thank you, Mayor.
All right,
Thank
if
you.
there's nothing else for the good of the order, we're adjourned.
Thank you.